DNA is a language. It's the language. It's instruction for cells. So it's like the machine language of cells. Once we start to control life forms in one way or the other, then it's gonna be super exciting. How is it possible that from like one cell we can have this plethora of different organs and brain, and how it's so incredibly difficult to understand conceptually that we are both originating from this little cell. And how do they know how to assemble themselves and where to go and form blood? I think we could create organs by just putting the right code into some kind of starter cell. I think it's just a matter of time before we see software guys actually programming other life forms.
Welcome to a new episode of the Quantum Economy podcast. Today we take a step into a different realm of deep tech, where biology becomes the new frontier, and the language of life starts to sound a lot like code. My guest is Johan Strömqvist, CEO and founder of Single Technologies, a Swedish deep tech company pioneering 3D DNA sequencing. Together we explore how technology is moving from observing life to actually shaping it. We talk about programmable cells, about the future of synthetic life, and the ethics of engineering evolution. What happens when life becomes code and the code becomes writable? How will this be impacted by scalable quantum computers? Will we now move from ChatGPT to ChatDNA? Here is the Quantum Economy podcast with Johan Strömqvist. At the heart of the quantum world lies a paradox that I write about when it kind of sort of feels that when you observe something, you introduce a measurement or an observer. So you kind of sort of change the state of things. What you're doing is that you're going down to the very intersection, I would say, of the observation and turning it into an experiment. And what I've thought about is that this is very much related to quantum physics. And the most important question that the two of us have been talking about, and basically what we all question, what is life? So do you think that life is computational, or how do you relate to that?
Well, I see it. I think I have a kind of an engineering perspective on life in general. I actually took a course at Karolinska Institute. I had a course called What is Life back in the days, inviting different people, what is life? And they all had different opinions. So it's quite hard to define it. But I would say I think we're consisting of cells, our brain, neurons, we have all sorts of types of cells, and they are basically running on software, which is the DNA, and then executing code, build proteins, which are functional blocks within those cells, and they talk with each other. And everything, I have a kind of the perspective that they are sort of machines, and we could tame them in the future. But fundamentally, of course, there are some stochastic things that govern these processes, because even if you have exactly the same genome on a different cell, it might not be, they all have the same genome in every cell, but they are still very differently. Different code is executed on a different cell. So there are some stochastic things going on. And, I don't know how well that is understood, but certainly it's debated and talked about.
So we started off soft. Let's take a step back and talk about your journey. Because this is where we're going to end up today. And if you could just look at where you come from photonics or lights, going into physics, and then eventually into biotech, and just take us a little bit, through your journey where you are today.
Yeah, it was actually a little bit the other way around. I started out with as an engineer here in Stockholm at the KTH, Royal Institute of Technology. I also did a lot of mathematics. I was actually going more towards mathematics than to the engineering field. But after a while, I thought it was quite dry. I wanted to work, a little bit more experimental, and I did my PhD in KD. I was lucky to meet a good supervisor, Professor Jakob Biedinger, who has a physics, engineering background as well as a medical doctor. So it was a pleasure to work with him in his lab. I was always interested in the kind of an intersection between biology and, again, engineering or physics, and I felt also that there was an opportunity in that area, because biologists, they didn't really want to do tech, and the engineers typically don't want to do biology, living system, unpredictable enzymes. So I kind of enjoy that space in between. So more specifically, during my PhD, I was working with advanced imaging technologies, in principle, I was working with trying to identify individual molecules, individual proteins going on in individual single live cells, and try to understand what's happening within those cells, dynamics, interactions, and so on. So I did that for numbers of years, did my PhD in that space, and then after that, I founded my first company, which basically applied all of these learnings, but now for industrial, industrial applications, not academia anymore.
But then you found your first company, you said. But I think for the people that don't know Single, I have had the privilege to visit you and to talk to you many times on what you're up to. But maybe you can just describe a little bit what Signal Technologies is doing and what you guys are trying to face and tackle.
Yeah. So the original of it was that, as I said, I was working with advanced imaging technologies. More or less, it was confocal microscope, for those of your audience who knows about that. And we kind of add on custom-made detectors to count photons, all of these advanced things. But fundamentally, that type of imaging was limiting our business, and it was very hard to parallelize this process to create those three-dimensional images that you can get with confocal microscope. So I met a guy from the fiber optical industry. That was about 2013, 2014, and he came from a completely different background. He wasn't into the field and so on. So he had a kind of a novel perspective on this. And we sat down and we were thinking about how we can create a faster imaging system so we can speed up imaging and actually generate more revenues for my company. So we built, we had an idea of how to scale this something like 1 million times faster on paper, and that's how we started. So we started from nothing, 2014, 2015, and we quite early on realized that this type of imaging system that we built or about to build could be applied in many different areas of let's say biology, not only biology, also in other industries. But we were fortunate to meet a professor, Mats Nielsen, at that time, 2015, who had just invented a kind of a concept where you could sequence genes directly in cells and tissue to localize where different genes are expressed in a tumor or in a brain section or something like that. So we met and we started to build a company working on trying to commercialize this concept. So we did that for a number of years until I think it was 2019 or something like that, when part of the company was acquired by a U.S. company. And then as a next step, we found a new tech, which we call 3D sequencing. But going back to your original question, what are we doing? I mean, we are sequencing DNA, which means that we have physical DNA molecules. They're so small, so you can't really look at the information. You can't identify the information by just looking at it. You actually have to figure out a way to extract that information. So a sequencer, it's basically a device that takes those physical DNA and generates all the information and upload it into the cloud, or create a text file of that information. So that's what we're doing, and essentially, so yeah.
So what are the advantages? Is it just that it's faster, or is there some substantial change in the technology? How do you go about it? What's different about it? Because sequencing is not something new, right?
No, sequencing has been going on from the 70s with old Sanger sequencing, which was the dominating technology when the human genome was firstly announced. I think it was by Bill Clinton, 97 or something like that, if I'm not mistaken. So that field has been a little bit like Moore's law in the semiconductor industry. For each second year, you improve the computational capacity, and it's been pretty much the same with sequencers. For each year, you can generate more data and at lower cost. So I think that's this has been going on since the 70s. The cost for sequencing a human genome has dropped from millions of dollars in 2005 down to $1,000 in 2015. And I would say that type of scaling was very much driven by technology. However, since then, 2016, 2017, it's been quite slow. They had this super Moore's law during a couple of years, 10 years, but since then, since 2015, 2016, not much has really happened. It hasn't really scaled as we were hoping for, but with our technology, we will be able to do that. So we will continue this path. And historically, 2005, DNA sequencing was used mainly for research, discovery kind of application. 2020, I think 60% of all sequencing is done for clinic application. You have forensic, you have, all sorts of other application. And that's just going to continue with basically replacing existing industries will kind of transform into a sequencing problem, and then you need sequence to do that.
I understand the efficiency gain of having a three-dimensional genome sequencing, but the core goal then is to use photonics or light or lasers to image life itself, isn't it?
Yeah. So there's been another during the last years. There's been this trend towards either you take your life form or the tissue or the cells, you basically destroy them and extract the information within them, and then put it into a sequencer and generate the data from these. Or you could, the other extreme is that you actually keep everything intact and you try to look at where different genes are expressed in which cell, etc., etc. And that's a very, very challenging task to do, because you need to have very, very high resolution to be able to observe all of these genes, and you typally want to have larger. If you want to look at the brain, for example, it's fairly a human brain is extremely big. So be able to capture all of these details, it will take you a very, very long time with existing imaging system. And also traditionally people have been just using sort of markers for different genes and look at the different colors, which means that you can perhaps look at 3, 4, maximum 5, 6 different things at the same time. What people are doing nowadays is they basically put small tags of DNA on the objects that they're interested in. Could be a protein, could be a RNA, etc. And then they can sequence those barcodes. And that gives you opportunity to look at more. So instead of looking 4 colors, you can just, with 4 bases, you can look at 4 to the power 4, 256 different objects. And if you just add another base, that's 20. Then you just get more and more data. So it's.
So as I get that principle, so basically there is to extend the observation, to have more light or more more observational realm. And then the other part is to compute, data processing. So when you say the brain is big, right? So how you guys then thought about advantages that you might have by applying quantum computing or photonic computing or having additional scaling capacities, or are you not there yet for the processing part?
Yeah, I mean, we don't have a quantum computer, so, but I can tell you that.
We all know that, but we are making some progress. So I was just like going in the
Yeah.
direction of like, do you see then
Well,
breakthroughs your end, or yeah?
I would say that we are extremely limited by computational power at this stage because we have a methodology to process those. We can take images extremely fast. And that means that, but we also have to do computational because we are actually sequenced. We taking images, but we're also sequencing all of these small barcodes in a three-dimensional kind of a matrix style. But we need to compute those. We need to identify the colors and the objects and make sequences out of that. Base calling is what you call it. You have to this computation is very. If you have that fast imaging system we have, those computation, we only have a certain limited time to do those computation, because the reason is that when you take the images, we're talking terabytes. It's huge images. You can't really store. You take one image and you have to remove it. You can't just store them. And for each cycle, you have to then keep the information but not the whole image, but the information about the different genes. So we only have like a timeline to do the computation. So that's kind of time critical. I'm not saying you need to have a quantum computer to do that, but you certainly need GPUs and so on. Otherwise, it would take very, very long time for analyzing those data. You need a lot of storage space.
Yeah, so it kind of sort of seems like a potent quantum computer or even some kind of photonics compute could make some huge benefits for your work then, right? I mean, it seems pretty obvious that there is also a scale effect here on the compute side.
Yeah, I mean, right now we are going for GPUs, but I mean, we always kind of need more computational power. And the question is where you need it, if it's actually in our process or if it's more related to try to understand the source code, the DNA, how it's associated with life. These type of questions, which people are now building foundation models to try to understand this. Perhaps quantum could have an effect there. But yeah, I haven't thought about that too much, to be honest. So.
No, but then are you now more in that field of engineering? Are you in your engineering part, or are you in your biology hacking life kind of sort of journey? What keeps you most up at night at the moment?
Well,
we're going to get to the entrepreneurial part of building a company, which is obviously
right.
also.
No, but I think that I would say it's more of the engineering. That's where our work is right now. But again, the concept that we developed called 3D sequencing, you can do both traditional sequencing, just to extract the information, and then we have the in situ approach, generating, identifying different genes and proteins and see how they localize in tissue and cells. That is much more biology, because what we're seeing is that different cell types, different tissue types, they all have different properties, which could influence your measurements and so on. So it's much more biology in that space. So we're doing. We have a couple of collaborations. One with Helmholtz in Munich and Coimbra University in Portugal, where we actually are doing a lot of trying to understand the brain damages from stroke, etc. How we can recover that with CRISPR, etc. But then it's more biology related. But typically, we're trying to work with really smart scientists and let them do the biology. And we of course have a lot of scientists, but we are an engineering company fundamentally.
So the driver is then, I mean, you often hear about reads per dollar in genomics, or like the scaling effect of getting the cost down for sequencing. So that's fair to say that that's still a baseline for you, or something that has, been a major part of your company to target just the efficiency of sequencing them from an engineering standpoint and obviously a cost standpoint?
Yeah. Again, I don't really like to just go for, it's only talking about the dollars for sequencing, but it is a big driver. But you because if you got to generate tons of data, like the many AI companies are trying to do now, you're trying to do hundreds of thousands of samples and build foundation models. Of course, the dollars matters per sample. So yes, dollar per sample and amount of data we can generate is a driver for us. But the concept 3D sequencing is both. We can also do those in situ applications where you want to contain the cellular context and so on. And so we're doing both. And so 3D sequencing is like a new concept that we want to apply for. And we believe that's going to be the preferred technology base for the life science industry in next 2 decades or so, if we get it right. But it's still a lot of challenges, technical challenges, and I think it's going to be like that, to be honest, the next 10-15 years. So it's going to be technology that opens up cheaper and better sequencing, pretty much like in the semiconductor industry. You need to get the pitch down to 5 nanometer, 4 nanometer. People are talking about 2-3 nanometers nowadays. That's always technology fundamentally, but it opens up huge opportunities for semiconductor companies downstream.
But then you could talk about the other part you mentioned. You talk about the brain and stroke and fixing things at the fundamental level. Then we go down to understand cells and kind of sort of, it's not like would you consider that, playing with nature, or you would just consider it a digital replacement, like building a virtual cell or building a digital life form to fix these? And maybe you can also elaborate a little bit more on the various things that you see in that field that are potentials coming out of this technology.
I think it's super exciting, that project, and it looks good actually so far. But the key concept is, I told you earlier about that you have the same DNA in each cell, right? But you still have very different cells, like the neurons or supporter cells in the brains, like the astrocytes that keep the water levels correct in the brain, etc. And I think I don't know how much I'm allowed to say, but let's talk in general then. You can, and then that's you're going from stem cells, and they differentiate into different cell types. So there was, I think, a Nobel Prize some years ago where you can actually back that up. So you can go from a cell type, take it one step back, and differentiate it to another type of cell. So the concept here is basically that you want to take other types of cells and differentiate them into neurons. Neurons, you're born with the neurons. They're not going to grow too much of them. But other type of cell, they can die and be rebirthed over and over again. You get new cells all the time. So this approach is basically take one of those type of cells that can be that it's growing all the time and transform into neurons of those areas that are dead. There's a lot of challenges to do that, but that's kind of the concept of it. So you would then restore the cells. The other portion which you talked about,
but just a quick pause because I want to understand. Would that to you mean to simulate or to replicate behavior of a cell? Or would you say it would be to understand the cell at the fundamental first principle level? So when you can take the cell and you could tap into the neuron, whatever that is, we are still pondering the substance of that. But if you would understand a cell, if you would replicate or fix a cell, would you say that you have replicated its behavior, simulated it, or would you say that you have understood it at a first principle, fundamental level?
Yeah. I mean, in this particular case of a Regeneron product, we actually, I mean, it's physical cells that you transform into neurons, and you have different, devices, delivery system from outside of the brain that you can actually create neurons. So that's actually is what we want to do in the brain. So you can restore strokes, all sort of damaged brains in one way or the other. So that's kind of the concept. But I think it's one thing, Anders, that is pretty interesting, which I think is worth mentioning. Maybe you heard Mark Zuckerberg and his wife. They were talking about this a couple of days about they founded this Johan Strömqvist biohub. So what they have been funding and what we've seen in this industry for quite some time is that there are a lot of different cell types. So at med school, maybe you're taught that there are 200 types of cell types roughly. But by going into what's called single cell sequencing, you can start to identify what genes are expressed in which cell. You can cluster them. And you can see that there are maybe thousands of those type of cell type, maybe even millions. And that is, I think that our human brain cells probably consisting of 100 different type of neurons. But anyway, so the concept here is, so cell types and cells are very complex. They're going to different states, et cetera, et cetera. So we're still trying to learn how this works. And the virtual cell is kind of the result of all of this investigation of looking at individual cells and see how different genes are upregulated or downregulated in different cells, and try to build foundation models of all of these data sets that they've generated. So that's the concept of that. But I think it's different parts of the software in the cells that is activated. You can play around with it. We can use different tools to shut down, press the cross of one program so it goes down, and you open up a different program, and suddenly you have a completely different type of machine, type of different of cell. So yeah.
But because I always like to play with these words, because is it then digital? Is it virtual? So for the sake of the argument, obviously it's complex. You have some 83 billion neurons, and you have 100. If you have 100 neuron types, you have the structures of cells. But if you could understand the foundation, and you could build a first principle, where do you distinguish between a virtual cell and a biological cell then?
Well, this is just the virtual cell is completely in silico, so there's no physical objects. Everything is digital, right? So that's the and so if you could do, I think one of the motivation is, instead of having wet labs and trying out different experiments, what if you could do everything in silico? You would basically have the biologists sitting in front of computers and try to understand. Pharma companies would try their different drugs in silico completely, instead of doing biological experiment. And I mean, that is to a large extent driven also by AlphaFold, where you can actually determine protein structure. So you want to kind of understand it's this complex machine of the source code, of the executed code, of the proteins, and try to get a replica of that machine in silico. That's kind of the concept.
But I mean, if you scale that up and you cannot distinguish between a virtual and a physical cell, that you can't see the different mechanisms or the understanding of it. If they are identical, you could argue that if you could then understand all cells or the totality of the brain, you would in fact create a human being, unless there is something beyond physics, some soul or some God or some.
That's a pretty interesting. So what if they could understand? Now they're going for one cell. Be aware, it's a virtual cell. They don't talk about virtual brain or anything like that.
I agree.
I mean,
it's to figure out that's my argument. If you figure out one cell and you understand one cell and you cannot distinguish a virtual cell from a biological cell, then in theory, there either are some limitations in physics that will prevent you from understanding all cells. But the same goes for neurons, right? If you understand one neuron, 10 neurons, 10,000 neurons, 100,000, 100 million, 100 billion, almost 83 billion. You have all the neurons and you have all the neuron types and you know how they fire and interact on a binary way, they light and they turn off, and you can build those structures. Would you then have a human brain? That's the question, right?
So you want to skip all the sex and all of that, that portion of the...
Well, the question is then, the argument are with you guys, not with me from a philosophical standpoint, because you would have to say why one singular virtual cell is different from a call it nature, physicalism, some kind of externalized that we're trying to replicate through digital. You would have to come up with an explanation, first principle, why they are different, because otherwise you are stuck in that argumentation that, well, if I have all cells, how do I then distinguish a digital twin from my physical personality, right? And that is, not only stroke and cancer and Alzheimer and diseases. This goes all the way down to consciousness and life itself, right? So I think the argument is with engineers and in the field of biotech and in genomics to say that this is different because we understand human cells at the foundational level and we understand virtual cells. And if we can't distinguish the two, then it's very hard to argue against, the emergent phenomena of life or consciousness from computation.
Yeah. So you could create this very, very highly intelligent virtual, program by mimicking how the human brain works and make it more efficient on a quantum computer, perhaps. I don't know, but yeah.
You wouldn't even
sure.
mimic.
I don't know.
You wouldn't even mimic. You wouldn't even call it virtual because it would be the exact same thing. If you cannot, on a cellular level, if you cannot with the DNA distinguish by what you call a virtual cell and a human cell, if you don't know the difference, you would conclude they are the same. They have the same function. They give rise to the same pattern. So if you replace them in a human body to fix, quote unquote, fix something, you would have to say then why you fixed it in a virtual sense, in a digital sense, so it has something that is different from the original cell. If they are identical, there is no different, right? There is no virtual. There is just, giving rise to a entity or a part of the body that is identical to the original, right? So the whole term of
maybe we should call it digital cell. I mean,
maybe we should just call it cell. Maybe at the foundational level, if we can't figure out the difference, why call it something else, right? I mean, this is. I mean, obviously, we're taking physicalism and descriptions here, but if it's explicable, then we come eventually. We will end up there. So I'm very curious about this field. And looking at DNA computing or some kind of molecular computation and to try to figure out how that would be different from how the body operates. And if we can't distinguish, we are
the question, right. The question is of course there's different building blocks. Obviously, it's silicon in a computer, and it's fatty acids and lipids and proteins and amino acids and so on. So of course that is different. The question is then, what if you would we have to understand consciousness and these kind of topics. So I don't know, would you create, since we don't...
That's skipping the step, because if you say that you would understand the cells, one can argue that consciousness would be a product, an emergent phenomena of that, right?
Yeah, I think, anyway, the future is going to be really, really interesting, because this is just, a matter of time before we will see this. Now we have the LLM revolution, but there's going to be new revolutions We were also astonished when ChatGPT turned up on a computer and we could actually talk with it, pass the Turing test and everything. But this will be so much bigger. I mean, once we start to control life forms in one way or the other, then it's gonna be super exciting. I mean, we could control. I mean, I think Genentech was founded back in the days. They could control how they produced insulin, but they could, insert pieces of codes into the bacteria and they could start producing insulin. And so we could tame life to some extent, but it's quite very fundamental. It's much more complex to really understand how a cell works, and especially if it's a multicellular machine, like an organ or something, or a human brain, which is an organ. So I really, the future is so interesting, and we're just in the starting out, I would say.
I think it's a crazy field because you're going from observing biology to using biology as a computer, basically, right? So it's just if you look at now taking AI and pairing that with AlphaFold, or now looking at how Alpha Evolved just came out this year. To me, it seems like this is a new foundation of biology. It's kind of sort of a completely new field that is just going to explode. So I'm very excited to follow this because it seems like it's a very different approach from going to observation to creation, right?
Yeah, I actually remember I did take those protein folding classes as a PhD and many years ago, and they were like, yeah, it's impossible to predict the fold based on the sequence information. That was kind of what we were taught, and now we see it. Like AlphaFold can just look at the sequencing and completely predict the folding and so on. So I think it's amazing what they did. I think it was last year they got Nobel Prize, right? But that's just one fundamental foundation model. There's going to be much more, and even much more exciting things going on coming up.
Yeah, but I mean, that was basically giving a Nobel Prize in physics to engineers. So, I mean, that's where it's heading, right? Basically, it's very obvious that things are going to get shaken up. And I think a lot of the things that people were taught in their universities, be it in quantum or in chemistry or physics, will have a completely different course or understanding just like 4, 5, 10 years from now. So I think it's a very exciting.
Yeah, I'm wondering how like computer courses or programming courses will look like in 10, 20 years.
Yeah.
I mean, now we're only programming computers. What if we could start programming cells and so on? I mean, there've been back in the days genome compilers. I don't know how successful they were, but I think it's just a matter of time before we see software guys actually programming other life forms. I think, it's just a matter of time.
Yeah, you're saying other life forms, but I mean, it's just basically as long as you cannot distinguish a difference, you're basically engineering life. But I wanted to talk a little bit about also your entrepreneurial journey with Single, and I mean, this is a deep tech company, but you have an engineering background and you have a scientific background. And what was the hardest transitions for you up till now, going from science to actually running a deep tech company, and also tackling investors and trying to find ways to commercialize your products?
Well, hard question. I mean, it's unless you're Harvard or anything. I mean, typically you're having a larger team. Right now we are about 30 people, so it's not that large, but typically larger than a academic group. We also have, it's also another difference that is clear, is that people are leaving the department after 5 years, or in Sweden at least, maybe it's less in US, and go on something else. So you only spend a couple of years, and when you're at best, then you're leaving. So here we can actually keep the best, and we can just continue on our product. So there's some like fundamental thing that is different. And of course, we are driven by not academic paper, but sales. So there is this fundamental difference as well. Otherwise, I would still say that I academia and industry, I think there's a lot of common things still. Maybe it's different also in the US versus Sweden, because Sweden remember, it was almost a little bit embarrassing if you went to the industry, because that was a little bit suspect. Are you thinking of money? But in US, obviously, it's very nice if you have a kind of industrial career as a professor there. So, and building companies, so on. So, but that has changed in Sweden for sure the last 10, 20 years. I don't know how it is in Germany or Norway, but otherwise, it's, of course, my role is perhaps going from doing experiments and so on to focusing on raising capital, to build business model, to look at competitors to some extent. But it's and also driving the whole team, catalyze it, and make everything as efficient as possible, because we only have limited amount of time. So there's a lot of differences, for sure.
Yes, I agree with the transition. I mean, you mentioned Google before with the Nobel Prize. That's a very good example of like how academia and rewards of Nobel Prizes move from academia to the research labs. So I think this is also now something that you see in Sweden, and obviously then eventually also in Germany. But it's also, this has to do with money. You get enough capital and money, then you can hire the good people, and you can let them do the same thing they do in research labs within the company. So do you see? I mean, obviously, what you're doing is talking about decades of development, and it's you need to keep that and sustain your conviction for the bigger vision. How do you cope with that? Do you see yourself as a research company or a startup, or how do you tackle those tensions of coming up with groundbreaking changes in the engineering and the physics, and also at the same time having that vision of the company? I mean, how do you see Single today? Is it a startup, or is it a research lab, or is it now a company that is maturing into a commercial player in the market?
Yeah, I would say we are a startup, even though we are passing that time limit. But I think also, it's a crazy task that we start developing, because we're doing we started out with nothing, essentially. We didn't. It wasn't like I had developed a prototype at KDH, and then we just got money and we outsourced the manufacturing like many other companies is doing. But we had to build everything from scratch. There were no. I mean, we are basically counting photons when we are doing our sequencing, because there wasn't any fast enough cameras out there when we started. So we have to develop everything from scratch. So you can just imagine that route, building it from scratch and try to become like 1,000, 1,000,000 times faster than what's something on the market. So it's been a crazy challenge. And I heard someone talking about the unicorn concept was maybe a wrongly stated idea. Maybe it should be a camel or something like that goes through the desert for without water, without anything, and try to survive. It's been a little bit like that, but it's always been. We always had like success things coming up, like the first images we took, which was like a one-dimensional. It's pretty crazy to see it, one-dimensional image that we had, and 2-dimensional, 3-dimensional. I mean, it's been really a journey of success now and then, and that keeps you going. And I also think talking with customers or potential customers, I always have this, for a majority of them, that there's been a lot of excitement what we're doing and what we could bring to the table for their research or for their industrial application or whatever they want to build. So that has always been like encouraging. If I wouldn't have those success moments, of course, that would be extremely challenging. But you should also be aware that like building something fundamentally new from scratch, I mean, it takes a lot of times. So that's how it is, especially if you're building a hardware. from the beginning. It's a little bit different if you're building a type of software, maybe a kind of tool that you can use. Then of course it's much faster. You don't need so much capital and people, perhaps. So it is a challenge. But on the other hand, it creates work opportunities for people, right? And I think we need this kind of industrial type of companies, high tech, deep tech, but also the opportunity to shape the future, but give also a lot of people working opportunities, working on exciting things. We need that thing, especially I think in Europe at this stage.
You know, but you talk about people. I mean, I remember getting together a group of people that could do PHP because we were building an e-commerce portal, a software tool, a platform that could run e-commerce sites. So everyone need to understand PHP. I mean, you need talents in biology, optics, AI. They barely speak the same language, right? So how do you cope with that? With talent, where you find people?
Yeah, that's a super good question. I mean, this has been and not only that, because we also have people from all sorts of different background and different knowledges. It's been a challenge, especially get the engineer and the more scientists to talk with each other and to communicate. And then, of course, different for people, countries, but that's another discussion. It's been a challenge. What I've identified is that there are a few that will kind of cross the bridge, or some engineer or one or two take a step over to the biological side and just trying to understand that. And you have the other people from the biology. There are a few that are kind of interested in the tech as well, and these people is extremely important for you because they're going to understand on a system level. I mean, it doesn't matter if you don't have any. I mean, if you're building like the world's fastest, let's say, imaging system, but it all destroys your samples, you can't do anything, then it's not worth anything. And the opposite, if you build, so I think that I think that's about it.
Yeah, I mean, this is, I'm talking to founders. It's always about people and culture and how to go through those. And I liked your analogy with the camel. I mean, it's the valley of death. When you don't have water and you have to fill it up again, and you go after it again, and you have the. So I understand. But talk us a little bit about Sweden. Sweden has a very entrepreneurial spirit. In comparison to Norway, we have oil, and in Germany, you've been kind of you have good academia, but on the tech side, you've been playing the catch-up game. Sweden has been pretty, forward-leaning and also good to anticipate future. How important do you think having the company in Stockholm or in Sweden is to the success of Single for the past and also now moving forward?
Yeah, since I haven't had it anywhere else, it's a little bit hard to know what's different. But I think, I mean, there are, we have, of course, fundamentally good institutes like the KTH on the engineering side. We've always been good engineers in Sweden. That's like one thing. But we also have had Karolinska Institute, for example. If in our space, at least, it's been like, it's very heavily associated with the Nobel Prize and so on. So of course, it's a good. It attracts a lot of talents around the world. We've also had kind of open. There's a lot of masters from all over the world coming to Sweden and KTH or Stockholm. So that gives us some kind of a lot of brain power. There are VCs around. We've had a lot of industrial companies, Volvo, Scania, SKF. I don't know if you heard about them. IKEA, obviously, but there's been a lot of industries in Sweden, Electrolux. So there's been maybe a tradition of industrialists from scratch. We didn't have those, maybe that natural resource that you have, oil. we have the iron, some natural resources, but I think we have to rely on entrepreneurship to a large extent. Maybe that's one of the reasons. Hard to know. There's also a lot of smart people in this country, I would say. Maybe the climate, but the climate is similar in Norway, so I can't say anything about that. But typically it's very grayish, except the summer. The summer is good, but it's I don't know also if we are a bit Americanized, to be honest, in Sweden. Maybe we are that a little bit more for some reason which I don't know, but I think US has always been like something that people have been looking up to from TV and computer gaming. Everyone had computers when I was a kid. That was probably the same for you in Norway, but yeah,
Yes, definitely.
hard to say.
Yeah. And I think also the natural resources makes you a bit complacent, but so I think there is the drive that we needed to build something in order to have that same structure. So I think the entrepreneurial innovative path has been very important. So what about your competitors? Who are your
You're also Viking.
Was that Vikings? Yeah.
So
No, we took care of all that 1,000 years ago. We conquered, we went out, and we came back. We thought we invented the oil, but we found it. We were lucky. And then afterwards, we're just enjoying that. So I think that's what Swedes are better at. But who are your competitors, Johan? I mean, what are the companies that are in the same position, in the same field, taking different approaches? Who do you look up to? Who do you compete against? Just give me a little bit of insight on the competitive landscape.
Yeah, the competitive landscape, it's been a monopoly for 15, 20 years, to be honest. There is this extremely nice company, Illumina, that just dominated in 2005, which, by the way, originally they acquired a company called Solexa from Cambridge. So I think they were from Cambridge, but it originates from UK. A lot of the fundamental concepts from that company, but they were really skilled and from a business perspective as well to build up this company. But Illumina is the number one, and they've been that since 2 decades or so. There are new companies. There are new companies in this space. It's an Israeli-US company called Ultima that's doing amazing stuff as well. There is now recently Roche is about to launch a system, which is going a little bit. And then you have also the other. I talked previously about the parallelization versus more sequential, or the CPU versus GPU. So I would say there's been a trend with Oxford Nanopore and Roche now being this sequential approach, the CPU approach, and then you have the GPU approach, which we belong to, Ultima, Illumina, and some more. So these are, I guess that's the competitive landscape. Also Element is another company. Almost all of them is based in US or in California, or at least the commercialization, that's where the funding is. So a lot of them has moved there or start there, San Diego, San Francisco. So that's about it. Yeah.
It seems like this is a field that would have huge advantages with QPUs then, and that the quantum economy will be a big driver for progress here as well. So I think there is still a lot of room here for exciting news ahead. So I think this is a very exciting company that you have, Johan, and I'm very excited to follow it as we go along. I want to come to a close, but talk a little bit about the ethical implications of what we are doing and what you are doing with your company, playing with creation, basically. There is a lot of responsibility, and do you think a little bit about like the implications? I mean, we started to talk about it before. If there aren't any clear boundaries to create virtual, digital, or simulated life forms, do you then reflect on the ethical responsibilities that you have?
Yeah, it's a huge thing. I think we have to reflect on it because, I mean, there's been back in the days. I don't want to pinpoint any names here, but there have been examples in the past of people talking about create, new life forms, etc. And they've been, semi-autistic in their mindset, and they are tech gurus that just want to create new stuff and believe the rest of the world will just appreciate them. And but then it turns out that could be a clash with people with different mindsets, or religious, yeah, maybe more religious people and so on. And I think you have to kind of figure out a way to respect that. But I mean, we're thinking about it right now. We're mainly focusing on getting it to work in engineering. We've had actually we had some. I think it was Boston University that had a kind of ethical engineering master competition. All sorts of companies, all sorts of universities in the world competed, and we asked them as to get support on the ethical aspects. That was maybe more towards, I haven't talked so much about like creating life form, but something that is real, very real right now is what is called prenatal screening, NEPT, and also IVF, in vitro fertilization. It's big things, and we are using sequencing to determine genetic information about these kids very, very early on. You can identify, for example, maybe 300-400 diseases very, very early on. And what are we going to do? There's certainly a lot of responsibility about that. But I think, for example, when it comes to that aspect, it doesn't necessarily have to. If it's NEPT is often associated with abortion, but I don't really see it like that. I think if you're more talking, if you could find a way to actually communicate with the mother or the parents, for example, about, be prepared. This is what's waiting for you. You might have a kid with a certain disease, but if you're aware of that, you can be prepared for it. You can take more. You can actually, it could become something good. It doesn't have to go into those necessarily ethical consideration of abortion or not. So that's just one thing.
But you think that is, reading the DNA, obviously, you could choose, you can opt out. I don't want to know it. I want to know it. Okay. So now you are confronted with the option to write DNA, to fix it. Do you think that we will have regulations? Do you think people will not do that? And the third level would be then to understand the emergence. Basically, we would hack or overtake evolution. And I think the question when we look at progress is, if you could engineer evolution, would you do it? Should we do it? Because I think it's very easy to say that we can prepare for a disease or a disadvantage or something, but that would not be my preferred option. If I have a disabled child, I would be curious about if I could write the DNA and fix it. And then obviously, from a technical standpoint, you would take it further and understand the emergence. And if you would have given the option to engineer evolution, would you take it?
I think we are a part of the evolution. We are doing this thing, so it just naturally happens. I think what we are doing is fast forwarding here in this space. So I'm 100% with you on cell therapy, or inject a certain type of gene that might be failing in the human body in some cells to solve the problem, so to speak. I think it's already happening. But this is going to come for sure. So that's pretty fantastic that we can start curing kids very, very early on. So yeah, I think that's just naturally that will evolve. I think also there are certain companies, I think so, I'm not 100% sure, but for example, there's one company, Grail, which is kind of a joint venture between Illumina and Google. They are identifying, taking blood samples and identifying early stage if you have sort of a cancer, they can identify where in the body. But I think that these companies are mainly targeting those type of cancer that you can treat. So they won't give you the information if there's something that will, kill you, so to speak. There's no treatment for it. So there are these dilemmas that different companies have different approaches towards. But overall, it is super interesting once we start to generate life. With that, I don't mean necessarily building it from scratch, but starting from a cell and inject different or modify the DNA and maybe
Do you think
yeah.
we will eventually reach a point where we can design life from first principle? And if so, should we?
Well, you need what's called womb in English. I don't know the word, but you need someone that can to grow it. I don't know if I think perhaps you could also do that if you first would have to make that synthetically, unless otherwise you would need a woman to carry on this new life form or an animal of some sort to do that. And I don't know if Colossal is doing that. These companies that want to create mammoths and stuff like that. But I think it's more or less inevitable that we're gonna create different type of life forms. I mean, everything talks to it because you have CRISPR, you can start editing stuff. And it's just a matter of time before we actually start creating. I think Coliseum or whatever the name is, they're one step doing this for extinct life forms like the Tasmanian tiger and so on. But I think we're gonna create it. The question is, yeah, I think maybe the lowest hanging fruit would be organs. So instead of you donating an organ, if we could create a heart, we know all the pieces of that. That will probably be like the next real breakthrough that could happen. Create a brain is probably a little bit further ahead, but I definitely think some like a liver or a human heart could potentially be done.
So you think that figuring how to build life, we will reach that before we understand the origins of life? What do you think will come first?
I mean, what do you mean by understand the origin of life? Because it's like bacteria,
Because we keep jump into the virtual part. So if we just say that we can have cells, we can have virtual cells, we can have technological, digital, whatever, biological substrates in the body. So that would be how to build it, to create it, because it would distinguish between life itself and the engineered life, so to speak, where we hack evolution and start to play with it. So one could be we would understand the origins of life at the fundamental level, and the other is we go at it technologically speaking, and we start to build it.
Yeah, as I said in the beginning, I think like creating it from scratch, from just having a thunder, and you have something like the Frankenstein. That I think is probably extremely difficult, but I'm just guessing.
But you're not ruling it out. You're saying it's extremely difficult. Yeah.
Yeah, that would probably. But what I do think is definitely manageable. It would be to understand the code, because we're starting out from one cell or two cell merging, right? And that is just a piece of DNA that governs everything, the whole process. Intestines, the skin, and everything. That is just a program, piece of software, and environment. So I definitely think we could, within some decades, create organs, even if it's super difficult. But I think we could create organs by just putting the right code into some kind of starter cell. I don't think we're gonna build a heart from assembling cells. That I don't believe in. But maybe you can start with a cell, compute it so it creates this life form, differentiate into different cells. I think that's gonna be possible. Yeah.
And then you would have the large language model version of that, where you don't talk to the AI GPT, you talk to the DNA, and you're interacting with life itself without understanding it.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it is, DNA is a language. It's the language, it's instruction for cells. So it's like the machine language of
Cool.
cells.
So you use that and you write and you ask, you could then start to chat with life, basically. If you would have a question to ask life, what would you ask it?
Well, yeah, I don't know, but I still think it's like crazy. How is it possible that from like one cell we can have this plethora of different organs and brain, and how it's so incredibly difficult to understand conceptually that we are both originating from this little cell. And how do they know how to assemble themselves and where to go and form blood? It's so amazing. So I mean, that how that architecture, how that works, that whole machinery, what's behind that? That would be interesting to know. I don't know who I should ask about it, but I definitely think that AI could help us understand how this language works, because we are, to some extent, we are just looking at the catalog structure of a file system, the catalogs and the cell and the file name. We don't look into the real information and instructions. We're going there, but it's going, I think AI is completely necessary to do this because it's so much information. Just think about the 3 billion characters in our genome. That's about 10,000 books that contains. And that's also some of the challenges for these AI models, because they are, I mean, that long sentences, that long books that you insert into these models is a bit of a challenge right now. So also from that perspective, it's going to be a lot of challenge to create those foundation models. I think Google is doing something now which can handle maybe 1 million bases or something like that. That's still impressive, but yeah.
You're basically
exciting.
you're describing problems that wouldn't seem to be a big challenge if we would have 1 million qubits or some kind of quantum supremacy, because then the large data that we're referring to today become really small in comparison. So I think that light, yeah, was that the light that we would shine on this and that would reveal life itself would also reveal what we are, the conscious experience, most likely. It's a very interesting development. And Jan, I would like to thank you for opening up and doing the philosophical aspects of. I think you're doing an amazing job. Have an amazing company. I cheer you on. And if we could circle back to where we started, and if I could ask you just one word. I use the word Lebendigkeit in German a lot because I like the word, but if you were to describe life in just one word, what does life mean to you, Johan, in just one word?
Possibility probably is one thing, or evolution is very associated with life, I would say. Evolution or possibilities, kind of. Yes, one word is hard, but yeah.
I like possibility, possibilism. I like that. And I tell you why. As long as there is possibilities, e.g., possibility for progress, for experience, we are still part of that magic, not knowing, not having the first principle understanding of what life and consciousness means. Because if you perceive a possibility and you can do something, you can experience that progress, then we are still in a world where one more question can be asked. And that is a world where not everything is understood and everything is solved. And I think that's a beautiful place. So I like the possibility explanation of it.
Thank you.
But thank you so much for coming on, Johan. It was great. Thank you for sharing your insights on Single. And I'm looking forward to the next breakthroughs and to see your company grow. And thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you, Anders.